Law at Work is sponsored by Perrett van Niekerk Woodhouse Macholo, leading labour law specialists representing businesses throughout South and Southern Africa, as well as Case Law, the quick, fast and easy labour law search engine.
Hello, I'm Simon Coleman and welcome to the Law at Work. Last week on Law at Work, we took a closer look at the trade union movement's views of the SA labour environment. Today we'll be getting an opinion from the employers. With me in the studio is Vic van Vuuren of BUSA. Welcome, Vic.
Well, hi.
Welcome back, I should say.
Thank you very much.
Vic, what we'd like to do is, obviously the labour environment has changed substantially since 1994. We've tried a number of things. Some things are working and some aren't. What, in your opinion, has worked in the South African labour environment?
I think many people don't realise that our labour laws, of the last round of labour laws that we've put into place, 1994, have only been in operation for 13 odd years now, even just under 13 years.
Yes.
You can't just keep chopping and changing legislation. So when we take a look back at those 13 odd years, I think in general our labour market has become more stable, it is functioning, and I think at the end of the day, when we compare with other emerging economies and the big economies, I think we can say it's working. What we need to do is identify, yes, those areas that aren't working, and I would say that the implementation and monitoring of the law in many areas is priority number one. And too often we look at some of the problematic areas and we say, right, let's change the law. I don't think there's big problems with the law. What we need to do is look at how we implement and monitor.
Right. You mentioned a stable situation since the law came out in '94. Some would argue that we seem to have seen a spate of strikes recently. Would that be an indication perhaps that it's not stable, or is that just a function of a working labour environment?
I think it's the functioning of a working labour environment. What we must also remember is we had a very quiet period for a number of years.
Lulled into a false sense of security.
And then we think, well, we're not going to have strikes anymore.
Yes.
We are in a very volatile situation. We have high levels of poverty and unemployment. And it's unavoidable that you're going to find pressure of people trying to narrow the wage gap. Unfortunately, we're playing in a global market, so it's not a very easy thing to deal with. But inevitably, what we're going to find are more and more strikes around shop floor issues.
Yes.
Previously, our strikes were mixed between shop floor issues and political, the right to strike kind of, right to vote kind of issue.
Yes.
But now that the political side has more or less been taken care of, it's now shop floor issues.
Right. Let's deal with the issues in the workplace. That kind of ties into what you were saying about implementing and monitoring these. Many have mentioned perhaps that the Department of Labour doesn't have any teeth as such to enforce these things. Would you agree with that statement?
I think that's hitting the nail on the head. I think the inspectorate from the Department of Labour is very understaffed. I think that they are doing a good job in the circumstances, but what they're trying to do is police transformation, employment equity, basic conditions of employment act, the Labour Relations Act. It's a very broad agenda that they've got to deal with. And I think that too often we as social partners, being business on the one hand and labour on the other, point fingers at government and say to them, look, you're not getting your act together.
Yes.
I think it's a pointing of fingers at all three of the partners.
Yes.
There's a role for business to assist government in the monitoring and the implementation, likewise from labour side. And I think the time has come now where, yes, government, we do believe, needs to look at the inspectorates from the DTI on the one hand and Department of Labour, depending on what we're monitoring. Yes. From transformation to labour law, but in this case most probably labour law will be restricted to the Department of Labour. But we need to look at how can we look at public-private sector partnerships. We need to look at the principle of co-regulation. We need to look at the principle of self-regulation if we want to be innovative in going forward in addressing these issues.
How would NEDLAC come into that? Well,
NEDLAC is an institution that we can use to do the deals on these partnerships that we're talking about.
Yes.
How can we do a deal with the, it's no good business doing a deal with government without labour.
Right.
And NEDLAC would be that institution where we can strike these deals.
That's a very interesting point. We had Adrian du Plessis on the show a while ago and we were talking about tripartism going forward. Is there a place for NEDLAC going forward? Would you say there is.
Most definitely. I think that one of the successes of South Africa in the last 13 years in able to stabilize the labor market has been the role of NEDLAC.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes it's disconcerting to note that some players in government tend to think that NEDLAC has done its job and now needs to move off.
Yes.
Not so. We've got a long way to go in terms of normalizing our society, and NEDLAC can play a key role where we can continually do deals that takes out the stresses and strains and the drama that will occur at the shop floor. Absolutely. By people seeing that here is a deal that maybe not the best deal, but it's going to assist both or
compromise that works for everybody.
It's a compromise process, yes.
Okay. If I may, what would you say perhaps hasn't worked so well in our labour environment?
I think the problems are that there are many people that are not abiding by the basic conditions of Employment Act. And what hasn't worked is the ability to identify those players who fly under the radar screen. That gives, in many cases, business a bad name. And if you're not able to detect and deal with those problems adequately, it's like a cancer, it grows and grows. And people tend to think, well, if I can underpay a worker and get away with it, the neighbor who's now competing with you is going to do the same in order to remain competitive. Right. And so I think it's the maintaining of a high set of standards through industries that has been a problem. We believe from business that there's also an important issue that needs to be dealt with in terms of how we manage the labor laws vis-a-vis small business. Because the creation of jobs lies in the realms of small business. Yes. And if we're going to maintain the same set of standards or laws for them as we do for all other players, it makes it more difficult for them to enter into the formal arena and to create jobs. And what's happening is the informal sector tends to be on the increase, and that's a worrying factor.
Yes. In terms of, would this mean different regulations for small business? Certainly in terms of labour laws relating to recruitment, dismissal, that sort of thing. Is that what you're
I think one needs to look at maybe an easier dispensation for them, yes. So yes, we are looking at maybe looking at certain components, not all, looking at certain components of the labour laws that we have out there in the different areas, and to say what is it that we can maybe make it easier for the small players to enter into the game, but at the same time not compromising key labour standards.
Yes.
I mean, the freedom of association, child labour, those kind of things. There's no negotiations around that. Yeah. But in some areas, there can be some flexibility which will enable it, make it easier for small businesses to enter into the arena and to be sustainable.
Okay. Vic, the big issue, 2010 is just around the corner. Are we working together with labour or...
I would believe so, yes, but what we must realize in the fact that we're working to a 2010, it's got very high time pressures on everybody. That's certainly going to be a lever that can be effectively used by elements of labour to secure and negotiate certain increase in conditions of employment or benefits. And we're already seeing the start of that with the Gauteng. As we speak, there's some problems there. We see that in the Cape Town area at the Greenpoint Stadium where they're rebuilding. There's been some problems there. And I think it's something that the construction industry, I hope, has factored into these into their time frames, because if we head towards 2010 and we get more and more of these issues, they're going to have to be dealt with very speedily and effectively.
Absolutely. Vic, yet again, thank you very much for joining me in the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And you at home, goodbye.
Law at Work is sponsored by Vic van Vuuren, leading labour law specialists representing businesses throughout South and Southern Africa, as well as Case Law, the quick, fast and easy labour law search engine.